Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and it's September 4th. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. And this evening, into this morning, I've been working on some tasks in the academy with assessment and things like that. And I've been having some productive thoughts about problems in modern education that affect all of us, really. Not just me as a headmaster, but me also as a father with children, as a teacher, as a Christian, as a fellow Catholic, as a fellow homeschooler, and others as parents and teachers, and most importantly, students. And I feel like I'm starting to tap into some issues, and others may have already addressed these issues without my being aware of it, but I'm starting to be able to identify some of the key problems in modern education, and what I think is, or what I would like to propose as something of a hypothesis for a solution. What's caused me to think of this is our own trip through the accreditation process this past year, because we've learned some concepts in the accreditation process that I think are really, really helpful. And I noticed that what we talk about in our accreditation meetings and our discussions with our evaluators, we do the opposite in education. What we do for accreditation, I think, is pretty smart. And then what we do for education sort of throws that prudence out the window. So let me just pitch this hypothesis in this video. I'll talk about the problem, and you as parents or teachers have probably experienced these problems, but I think I'm starting to come to an idea that's pretty radical, but I think you'll agree that I'm onto something, and it's not what we practice in education, and I think it's a big part of the problem that we have with our students, because the educational system that we have prepared for them is really not designed to help them. And I'll explain this. So let's just get into this a little bit. And I decided to put the camera on just because I'm at my desk tonight, and I'm not out for a walk talk, and sometimes it's just nice to put a face on a video. Now here's the problem. Throughout most of history, very few people went to school. The only kids who would go to school were kids who were competent and judged to be capable of succeeding in what was then understood to be the essential curriculum. The curriculum was objective. The assessment was absolute. The teachers knew what the curriculum content consisted of, and students were judged for their mastery of it. They were judged for their actual mastery of the objective curriculum. So if there were 100 important points that need to be understood, students were judged as to whether or not they knew those 100 points of the curriculum. Now, the curriculum was objective and the assessment was absolute, but very few of the children actually went to school. That's where the problem comes in. The curriculum was objective, there was one standard across the curriculum, and the assessment was absolute. But only a small number of children were educated. So that method, that system worked because they only dealt with the brightest and best children. Now fast forward to the 19th century, and we've got the advent and development of this idea of public schools, where we're not going to skim out the upper, 10%, if that. We're not going to give an objective curriculum, an objective education to a small number of elite children. We're going to try to educate everyone. We're going to try to give every citizen an education. We're going to try to bring all of the children into the schools and educate the citizenry. Now, the problem is that we now have a school where children are gathered together that have real differences. They're really different. And the differences are not simply because this kid is from this family and that kid is from a different family. That family is really good with education. This family is not good with education. Anyone who works in education knows that that's not true. Generally may be true, but really when you get down to the individual students, that's not true. I came from a family, for example, that's not intellectual. My parents are not intellectual. My siblings, none of them are intellectual. It's just me. I came from a family, and I'm the oddball. So it's not a family thing. It's an individual thing. And so when we bring all of these children together, we've now got a school filled with very different individuals. And I think we can divide them, when I think of students, I can divide them into 4 different groups, 4 different kinds of students. And let me know what you think about this. First of all, you have gifted, intellectually gifted children who desire to get better. They want to learn. They're gifted and they desire to learn. They have aptitude and interest. That's the first class of students. Those are the best students. They have intellectual gifts and they desire to learn. The second group consists of students who have intellectual gifts but don't desire to learn. I was one of these students. When I was in high school, I was an intellectually gifted child who did not wish to study. If I could cheat my way through a test and get the grade that I needed so that I could play baseball, that was all I concerned myself with. I was not interested in reading, studying, learning. I just needed grades because I was in school to play sports. I was a gifted student that did not want to learn. That's the second group. The third group is a child or children who do not have intellectual gifts, but they desire to learn. They desire to improve themselves. I have a son named Samuel who is 17 years old right now, does not have intellectual gifts, but does his schoolwork and desires to learn. That's a third class of students. And then the fourth class, the worst of the students, are those who do not have intellectual gifts and do not wish to learn. Now notice, I didn't say they're the worst children. I said they're the worst students. So 4 classes of students: gifted and interested, gifted but not interested, not gifted but interested, and not gifted and not interested. So 4 groups of students that I think it's pretty safe, to say that every child could be put into one of those 4 groups as far as education goes. Now the problem with public schooling, the problem with modern schooling, is that we've got all 4 of those groups together in a school. And the teachers are asked to educate them. Well, how do you do that? You can immediately start to see the problems that develop. We've got different kinds of students with different capabilities that require different treatment. How can one teacher teach that mixed group of students? Well, they can't. So what do? We sort the kids. We have an honors class, which is for, group one. We've got a level one class, which is for the second group. We've got a level two class for the third group. And then the ungifted and disinterested go down in what we used to call the Bobo class. That's how schools work. The objective curriculum is really only being taught to the honors students, and they're being held to something of an absolute standard. We're talking about SAT scores, GPAs. We're talking about things like, AP classes and things like that. There's an objective curriculum, and the evaluation, the assessment is pretty absolute. But we've got all these kids in school, and so we just, send them to school, but then we just sort of sort them and put them on different tracks, and we're really not educating all the kids, because we've kept the objective curriculum with absolute assessment, and we've brought that into a new school where we're dealing with students who would never have been in school, where the curriculum was objective and the evaluation absolute. So this, I think, is the problem in the modern school. And I know that as a teacher, in developing the curriculum for the academy, I run into this trouble all the time. I have this dilemma, and I'll give you an example. Take a course like in the academy we have a course on Aesop's fables or sacred scripture. I mean, we could take just about any course, but let's take an obvious example. Let's take a Bible class. Okay, we want the children to read scripture. Now that's simple enough, but how do we assess students in the study of sacred scripture? Now, the greatest Catholic theologians, doctors and saints of the church, have spent their whole lives studying sacred scripture. And if we were to ask any of them, if I was to ask St. Augustine or St. Jerome or St. Thomas Aquinas what they believed their percentage of mastery of the sacred scripture was, they would all say 0. They would say the scriptures are divinely inspired, the wisdom of the sacred scriptures is infinite, and even after all of these long years of study, we're barely scratching the surface of anything. The scriptures are just, unsearchable. Well, that's true of doctors and saints. If that's true of doctors and saints, and it is, well, then what do we do with children in school? How could we ever have a sacred scripture course and give anyone a grade? How could we establish a curriculum? How could we assess student mastery? What you see is it's just impossible. It's impossible. Then we have one student who was raised reading the scriptures, and that's sort of like an honors student, and we've got a student who comes from a family that doesn't even have a Bible, and so they're both 15 years old. Well, what do? Do we just shove the disadvantaged student into the Bobo class and focus our attention on the honors kid? If we're going to do that, what's the point of even having compulsory education? What's the point of bringing all the kids to school if we're simply going to chop them up into groups and shove all the kids into the lower levels and just focus on the upper class, the intellectual upper class anyway, just like we used to? You see, there's no point in this idea of public education if that's what we're going to do. We might as well just let the kids out of school and just focus on the honors kids. So not much has changed, even though this massive plan for public education has been promoted. We're still educating the elite and just sort of pushing the rest of the kids through for the sake of satisfying this political plan of ours to have everyone in school. My question is, how should a study program be organized, and how should it be assessed if it's intended for all children? I think this is a really challenging question. How should it be assessed? What should be taught and how should it be assessed if it's going to benefit all children? And, I don't know about your family, but in my family, the difference is, I think I've got all four of those groups represented among my 10 children. I had one daughter, for example, my oldest daughter Elizabeth, who is reading at age 3 and is an academic zealot to this day. And then I've got another daughter who didn't read until she was 10. And while I would say she does not have the intellectual gifts that her older sister does, she now has interest in studying, even though she studies without the same level of intellectual talent, as it were. Two very different girls among my own children. Same is true of boys. I've got, an oldest son, Jonathan, who is a motivated student, pretty smart, gifted and motivated. Now, he's like me. He became motivated in college, but he wasn't motivated when he was younger. And then I've got another student. I mentioned my child Samuel, my son Samuel, who's not intellectually gifted, but he likes to study, and he works every day to get studies done. So we've got all this variety even in one family. Now, as a father, I'm not interested in just educating my brightest child. I'm concerned about all of my children, especially the weakest. And so I'm stuck wondering, what in the world do I do? Do I just give my weaker students dumb materials and save the quality materials for my gifted children? How do I evaluate their progress? Do I just have a test, like, an absolute assessment that I give to all the children, and one child always gets A's and one child always gets F's, and that's just how it goes? Doesn't make any sense. But that's how schools work. That's how we teach, and that's how we assess student work. It's an objective curriculum, and it's an absolute assessment. And because it doesn't work for all the kids, we sort them into classes, and really we neglect most of the kids. So even though we're sending them to school, we're still not really giving them an education, because our school is serving an objective curriculum with absolute assessment, which isn't going to work for them. And so we have this dilemma. Now, here's my hypothesis for the solution. What I believe needs to be done, that I don't think ever has been done in modern schools, ever since education became compulsory, ever since education became, legally mandatory for all children, I don't believe they ever changed the curriculum or method of assessment to actually serve that different school model, this new public school model. I don't think they ever developed a curriculum or a system of assessment that actually serves every child in the school. They divide and sort them and give them completely different experiences, rather than giving them an education for all of the children, for all of the students. And in order to do this, something radically different has to be done. Now, fast forward to this past year and us going through our accreditation process. In the accreditation process, what most people think is that there's some objective standard of measurement, and that the accreditation evaluators visit a school and judge whether or not that school fulfills that standard. But that's not what accreditation is. That's what most people think it is, but that's not what it actually is. The way that accreditation actually works is not by establishing an objective set of detailed achievement standards and then asking whether a school achieves them. What the accreditation institution does, the accreditation agency, sorry, it's late. What the accreditation agency does is establish principles, standards that are principles, and it evaluates a school's present status with respect to those principles. But that's not the accreditation question. The question is, can the school improve? Does the school have the ability to improve? That's what accreditation is about. Does the school have the ability to improve? Does it have the capacity? And so as soon as the evaluation is worked out, the initial accreditation review and evaluation, the question is, what are you going to do to improve? That's really the question. What is the school going to do to improve? And the school, by entering into the accreditation process, makes itself accountable to these evaluators and to a plan of constant self-improvement. That's really what accreditation is about. So when a school is accredited, the accrediting agency is really saying to the parents, this is an institution that's doing the best that it can and that's committed to constantly getting better. And we're working with them and we see them taking concrete, practical measures to continually improve. They're going to get better and better because they're committed to self-improvement. And we're keeping an eye on them and we're watching, and we will testify that they are committed to constantly doing all that they can to serve what they call their stakeholders, the parents and the students, the teachers and so on, and constantly improve the quality of learning in that school. That's what accreditation is really about. Notice, it's a relative measure. It's a relative measure. So if we were to go to the most elite, established preparatory school that's sending kids into the Ivy League, and we were to ask, is that school accredited? The answer would be yes, it's accredited. And then if we were to go to a public school, which obviously is not of the same quality as that preparatory school, and ask, well, is this public school accredited? The answer would be yes. And we would say, wait a minute. This public school can't get kids into the Ivy League. How can this public school be accredited and this preparatory school have the same accreditation? And the answer is, it's not an absolute measure. It's a relative measure. Both of these schools, although they may be at different levels of quality, both of them are committed to the good of their students, and they're constantly working to improve. So if there are weaknesses in this school, they're aware of them, and they've got plans in place to eliminate those problems. And even the elite school, the elite school is examining itself and constantly looking for weaknesses and working to improve itself. Both of these schools are committed to ongoing self-improvement. That's what it means to be accredited. Now, as we were going through this accreditation process, I was surprised by how helpful this method of assessment actually was. It opened, or I should say, it made us examine ourselves not in some kind of fearful way that we're not going to meet the bar and we're going to get rejected. It took all that away and said, look, this isn't about getting rejected. This isn't about failure. This is about self-improvement and whether or not you're interested in committing to self-improvement. And once that switch flipped, we realized that we want to examine ourselves as hard and as thoroughly as we can, because This is all just about self-improvement. And so we went into the evaluation process. We went into this self-evaluation process and found it really helpful, and were able to focus on our weaknesses without having any fear of failing, because that's not how it works. We dug and searched for our weaknesses because the goal is simply self-improvement. That's the goal. And when you take the potential for failure out of the way and you say, no, this is about constant self-improvement, that psychological switch that flips really changes everything. It makes a person eager to examine his institution and try to find the weaknesses, not because you're going to be penalized for them, but because you're going to be helped to fix them. And that's an important difference. It's very much like the sacrament of confession in the Catholic Church. We're examining ourselves, and we're going to confession, which is this humiliating, painful experience. But the reason that we're doing it is because we know that Christ offers us absolution. It's not to judge us. It's not to punish us. When we confess our sins, we don't have to fear that the Pope is going to quickly call the police and have us arrested because 10 years ago we stole something and we've confessed it. We don't think about being punished for the sins that we confess. We simply focus on being sanctified. We're focused on becoming more virtuous, more holy. And therefore we're eager to examine ourselves thoroughly and confess our faults because we're committing to self-improvement. And the act of contrition is really a promise or pledge of self-improvement, if you think about it. And the accreditation process works the same way. There's no failure. The only possible failure is an unwillingness to examine oneself and improve. That's the only real failure. And I found that in the accreditation process to be really, really motivating and encouraging. It was inspiring to realize that this isn't about getting a score. This is about finding ways to improve ourselves. Now, once you think about that and how, let's say, the sacrament of confession or reconciliation works, and think about how the accreditation process works, you then come to schooling and you realize we do everything the other way around. We don't do that. We don't practice that. We don't have this positive focus on improvement as the mode of instruction and assessment in the school. We have a curriculum. We have tests. We give the kids grades. We sort them. We label them, and so on. We do exactly the opposite. And so a kid has to be terrified on a test day because if he takes this test and gets a 60%, that's his grade, and he's sort of labeled as a failure, and there's no way to fix it. It's a high-stakes test, as they say. And the kids learn that. The kids learn that these assignments and tests and quizzes are sources of failure. And so what the kids do, what I did when I was a student, was they figure out ways to get good grades. And they do so dishonestly because the school is not designed to honor or award honesty. It just honors grades. No matter what the teachers say, it all boils down to grades and numbers and percentages. That's what matters. And clever kids will figure out ways to get high grades. And they're very creative. I'll just give you an example. And it's funny because we look at criminals sometimes, and you look at these complex criminal activities, these criminal schemes, and you say, man, if these guys would just devote their intelligence to honest work, they would be wealthy. I don't know why people give their intelligence to crime when, the intelligence that they used to do criminal activity could have helped them start and run a business and be successful legitimately. So you see that, but I was an example of that kind of a kid. I was a cheater in high school. I knew that I had to get good grades. I knew that my teachers were irresponsible and they didn't pay attention. I knew that everyone from my sports coaches to my parents would be happy if I got good grades, and I could easily figure out ways to get good grades because I didn't know how to study. I didn't have a home environment that allowed me to study. I didn't have any instruction in study methods or any support for study. I was just dropped off at the school, and I knew that I needed to get good grades or good scores once in a while, just when it was necessary. And I could figure out schemes for cheating that would enable me to get good scores. I'd make a cheat sheet and sit right in front of the teacher's desk, and I would take my cheat sheet, like a little piece of index card or a Post-it note, and I would actually set my cheat sheet right in front of the teacher up against the calendar on his desk. I didn't need to look around or anything to cheat. My cheat sheet was right on the teacher's desk, right in front of his face, but on my side of his calendar. In physics class, we weren't allowed to do any programming in our calculators, but we were allowed to have an instruction booklet in the pocket of our calculator, and I would just fill the instruction booklet with cheat sheet notes. My point is just that when grades are the goal and failure is in front of people, cheating becomes an effective method of surviving. And that's why we have a cheating epidemic all through our schools, because the schools have created a system that pushes children to cheat, that rewards them for cheating. I'm not saying it commands them to cheat. I'm not saying that it forces them to cheat, but what it does is it rewards them for cheating. And the kids can cheat through school and finish and have good grades and have an impressive transcript, and no one will know. The modern schools allow that because they impose this objective curriculum with absolute assessment on a mixed body of students, where there are some kids who everyone knows they're going to fail, and they've got no option but to cheat, and so they cheat. The school creates that temptation. If those kids had no fear of failure, cheating wouldn't make any sense. If those kids knew that when you take a quiz, it's really great to see that you've got some wrong answers because those are the things you don't understand. And so imagine if there was, not necessarily a grade that went in the grade book, but there was a grade that showed your current status, and you were then challenged to review that lesson, retake that test, and improve that grade. And what mattered was not whether you had a 60% or a 90% on your first try. That was irrelevant. What mattered was what you had on the second try, and what you had on the third try and the fourth try, and whether your score, your mastery was improving each time you took that test. And as long as you were working to improve yourself, you were rewarded by the school for a commitment to self-improvement, just like the accreditation process, just like the sacrament of reconciliation. But schools don't do that. And so I can see what needs to be done if we're going to educate all children. The curriculum can remain objective. That's not a problem, because for many subjects, the curriculum is and must be objective, because there are arts and sciences that are just, they are by nature objective. But the assessment of student work, this is what's really different. The assessment, or I should say the reward system, the system of rewards and punishments, should not be absolute based on a score or, a rank or anything like that. Well, it could be on a rank, but let's say not on a score. So the kids who get A's shouldn't automatically be rewarded like when I was in school, and I'm sure they still do this today, but we got awards. I would get an award for being on the All A honor roll or the AB honor roll. And you can see we reward absolute measures. We reward grades for activities. That rewards cheating. That motivates cheating. Rewards the elite intellectual kids, the kids who would have been in school without compulsory education. But it doesn't do anything for the other kids, and it also motivates the clever kids to cheat. The school's designed to do that, and it's not a good system. What would fix that problem is if the school actually rewarded students who improve. If improvement was considered the real virtue, everyone would be equal. Whether you were the most gifted student or the least gifted student, if the measure was improvement, the differences in your gifts would not matter. It really wouldn't matter if you got a 95% or a 65%. All that would matter is what you do on the next try. Whether that 95% goes up to 100%, whether that 65% goes up to a 75%, that's what matters. And students should be rewarded for improvement, being willing to continue working and studying and trying again and improving. Improvement should be rewarded. In sports we do that. We have awards like most improved player, and we acknowledge that, Brian might be the best player in our baseball league. He might get the most outstanding player trophy. We all know that. That's objective. But Tommy, last year, he was terrible. He couldn't catch, throw, hit, run. He couldn't do anything. But this year, he's a lot better. He's the most improved player, and that's a respectable award to say, you might still not be as good as Brian, but you're a lot better than you were last year. And most improved player is an important award for any team. My kids are interested in weightlifting and running. They like to exercise. They like to prepare for military careers. They like lifting weights, exercising, swimming, running, and so on. And what's so good about those activities is it's a competition against yourself. So, my son Jonathan is a Hulk. He can, with weightlifting and stuff like that, he's just incredible. He can do pull-ups with 2 45-pound weight plates tied to his waist. Just incredibly strong kid. But a lot of that is natural gift because he's been like that since he was 15 years old. And so he's judged for whether or not he's improving himself. For example, he was incredible with weight training and strength and flexibility, but he didn't like to run. And so I would always pick on him because he didn't like to run. And he's got a younger brother named Jacob who's an excellent runner. And I would pick on John that he had this flaw in his training, that for all of his lifting and strength, he wasn't a runner. And last summer, Jonathan committed himself to running and became a great runner. And for me, that was very respectable to see him overcome a weakness like that and improve himself. Improve himself. It doesn't matter, absolutely doesn't matter that he's the most fit. The fact that he was willing to identify a weakness and commit to improving it and eliminating that weakness, that's praiseworthy. That commitment to self-improvement. And so you can see how the spirit changes when we talk about self-improvement, self-improvement, self-improvement. We don't talk about grades. We don't compare grades. We don't compare Jonathan's grades to Samuel or Brian's, batting average to Tommy's. We compare Brian's batting average this year to his batting average last year. Tommy's fielding percentage this year compared to his fielding percentage last year. Jonathan's time, rucking 12 miles this year as opposed to his time last year. And Jacob's time running a 5K this year with his time last year. We focus on improvement. We focus on self-improvement, self-examination, and constant improvement. And you can see what a radically different culture that would be. Because what does it really matter? What does it really matter? We already know that all of these kids are not going to be academics when they grow up. We already know that. We pretend we don't know that once the school bell rings. We pretend that everyone's supposed to become academic. We already know that they're not going to be academic. We could probably select the kids in second or third grade and tell who's going to be academic and get it right most of the time. I know in my case, my kindergarten and first grade teachers told me I was intelligent. It was obvious when I was young that I was gifted, and at least when I was young, I was interested in study, and I was at the top of my class. Then when I got into sports, I lost a lot of that interest, but my elementary school teachers could tell that I was intellectually gifted and set me apart. And, in my adult life, once I got my act together spiritually, I set myself apart from my classmates and went on to earn a living as an intellectual. This is no mystery. We can see that. We know who those kids are. But what our desire should be in a school is just to improve every student, just to take every student where they're at, understand that they're wired differently. They're made differently. God has given them different abilities. God has different intentions for their lives that none of us know. They're going to be worked out in providence over time. None of that's our business. We don't need to know any of that. We don't need to measure IQ or anything like that, try to sort the kids. We don't need to do that. We simply need to ask, where are you at today, and where can we help you to get tomorrow? And where are you today, and where were you last year at this time? And just constantly focus on improvement. Now, assessments would need to radically change. The way we assess students in modern schools, this absolute assessment with grades and things like that, based on an objective curriculum, would not be the way that we assess student progress. We would assess student progress by simply focusing on principles and constantly assessing those principles and asking whether the students are improving or not. For example, let's take a kindergarten reading class. We can have a kindergarten reading lesson, and there could be a story, an age-appropriate story, and we could treat it like a literature class and say, okay, Tommy, did you read your story? Good. So tell me what's the story about? What's the main idea of the story? Who are the characters in the story? Who is the narrator of the story? What do you think is the most important idea in the story, and so on? We could go through the reading lesson as if it were a literature class, but it's a reading class. And so what we should have are principles of reading, principles of phonics and reading, learning how to actually work with written text and so on. And we should be interested in seeing where a student is at with his ability to read at the beginning of the year, and just continuing to work with him to get better and better, and reassessing him, and just making progress the measure. To say, you know what, in September we tested Sammy's reading and he got this score, 64. And then we worked with him for a couple of months, and before Christmas break we gave him a second test and he had an 82. And so Sammy won an award for his improvement. He improved 18 points on his assessment. And then we came back in the spring, he scored a 91, and then finally at the end of the year he earned a 100%. So his improvement, is significant, and he's reached the end of that assignment, which was mastery of that content. And all we focus on along the way is his improvement. What gets a student rewarded is improvement. What gets a student punished is a disinterest in self-improvement. That's the real problem with modern schooling, is that we don't reward improvement. We don't reward self-improvement. We award absolute grades. We award the A students, the AB students, and everyone else we treat like they're just, unsuccessful. Where among all of those students, there may be significant improvement to be found. If we would look at their scores and track their progress, we might find that a kid in the class who has an 86 average is actually currently the most rapidly improving student, on a trajectory that's going to bring him to significant places in the next few years. And yet, when he's judged absolutely, he's among the average students, and it's really not true. So you can see that an assessment system that focused on progress rather than absolute scoring would radically change education, would motivate everyone, would allow everyone to study together, and not to compare, because comparing yourself with someone else is irrelevant. You need to compare yourself with yourself. Now, in the academy, as I said, I've been working just to try to figure out in some of these courses and lessons, like what's the cause of the frustration that I sense. I'm just not happy with who's being rewarded. I'm not happy with the effect of this course on the students' morale and things like that. And I want to learn how to fix it. And I just sit here, taking notes and writing these things out, these thoughts and observations, and I feel like I'm really coming to some solutions where, by changing the way we assess students, by helping parents to think about it differently, helping the students to think about it differently, to just always focus on improvement and not on any absolute scores, but just to see that as a snapshot. That's just a snapshot. That's not your grade. That's not your final grade. You're not labeled. You're not being put in a different track. You're not being put into a different level. You're going to stay with everybody else. Everybody studies the same thing at their own pace, and everyone just focuses on improvement. That's a radically different environment for learning, and I think it benefits everyone. So I wanted to talk about that. I'm thinking and working to implement these things in assessments that I offer in the academy, where we can just focus on improvement. So you'll probably see those things popping up here and there. I'm developing a strategy for it and a scheme for actually carrying it out. It's just a matter of getting it up and running and testing it, and then really changing the culture and focusing on self-improvement, rewarding those who get better and warning those who either remain as they are or get worse over time. And getting worse over time can also be a relative thing, because you may have been the brightest kid in second grade, but you stopped working. And the kids in second grade who weren't so bright, they're still working. And by the time you're in sixth grade, you're no longer among the bright kids. There are kids above you who have been working hard and doing their studies. And, so it's just very complicated. There's like all these wheels within wheels, but the key is just focusing on improvement of every individual, taking responsibility as a school, as a teacher, as a parent, taking responsibility for every child and focusing on improvement. That radically changes the spirit of education, and I think will motivate kids and help students, especially those who don't like studying, help them not to be just miserable and frustrated. Just having this school experience that's just a common source of criticism and failure, but getting them out of that spirit and saying, look, all that matters is you get better. Let's raise this score. 5 points over the next month. Let's just get better. So that's what I wanted to share. I think it can be done. It's just a matter of going into each assessment as a teacher and thinking about the goal of that assessment differently. And I'll continue to talk on this and write on this because I think it's significant, and I think we're going to be able to do this, to actually accomplish this goal in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy as we move forward. So keep an eye out. Let me know what you think, if you've got any comments, anything you'd like to ask about or dig into a little bit. But I'm hoping to find a way to manage assessment so that all students are challenged and motivated and rewarded by being committed to self-improvement. I hope that's helpful. God bless.